Are you raising your child to be bilingual but are feeling frustrated at the lack of progress? Are you wondering if you are doing something wrong? Or maybe your child's doing something wrong? And more importantly, how can you change your approach to help your child thrive in all the languages? By the end of this video, you'll know the answers to these questions and know the top 5 mistakes you must avoid if you want to raise a bilingual, trilingual, multilingual child. These are all mistakes I've seen people make countless times in real life, myself included. I want you to avoid the struggles that I went through, and I want you to maximize your chance of success. And most of all, I want you to accept and own the ultimate honest truth. The problem is not with them, it's with you. So why listen to another random person on the internet? Firstly, as a mum raising 2 trilingual children, I have frontline experience of it all. In addition, I'm a language professional. After graduating from Cambridge University with a non-language related degree, I've trained as a qualified translator and language instructor. I'm also an associate member of the Chartered Institute of Linguists in the UK. In short, I'm absolutely passionate about empowering parents to raise multilingual children. After watching this video, I encourage you to download my free family language planner, which will help you formulate a plan for your family. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's get to the first common mistake. This mistake is one of the main reasons why parents struggle to get their child to speak the target language. Before we get to what this mistake is, let me first ask you a question. How many times have you heard someone say something like, "Oh, doesn't raising your child with more than one language confuse them?" I've heard this so many times, read this so many times, and you probably have too. But let me tell you something. Speaking to your child in a language other than the majority language will not confuse them. What will confuse them is flip-flopping between languages. I once witnessed a curious scene in a local playground. Geez, it's another playground story, but please forgive me. There was a mum there playing with her son who looked to be about 18 months old or maybe 2 years old, tops. I first heard the mum speak to him in English. She didn't sound like a native English speaker to me, but whatever, that's beside the point. But then, to my surprise, the mum started speaking to him in what I think is German. Although it could have been Dutch or I don't know, I can't say for sure. I went on observing them for a while. Yeah, that's what I do when I hang out in my local playground. And it was becoming clear that the mum was totally flip-flopping between English and German when talking to her son. Like, German in one sentence and then the next sentence will be English. I was really curious to see how the son would respond, but I don't think I heard him say anything back, so maybe he wasn't speaking yet. And this mum is far from alone. I've seen this so many times in our local area where the mum or dad would speak to their child in language A in one sentence and then switch to language B in the next sentence and switch back to language A in the next sentence and so on and so forth. Now listen, this mistake can totally tank your effort. If you're doing it now, I would say stop doing that before it's too late, okay? In 99% of cases, it's a recipe for disaster. Pick a language and stick to it. If you are new to this whole multilingual parenting thing, go watch my video where I explain the 3 main strategies. Pick a strategy and try to stick to it. Of course, it's okay to speak to your child in a different language in some circumstances. That might even be part of your family's strategy. But you need to set clear boundaries and expectations as to who uses which language and in what context. This is so important. Based on my observation, parents who take this flip-flopping approach will inevitably end up actually confusing their child, which in 99% of cases results in their child defaulting to the safest option, the least confusing option, which is the majority language. I'm only talking about raising multilingual children in a monolingual country with a very dominant majority language. Like in our situation, for example, I'm Chinese and my husband's Russian. We live in the UK and raise our kids here where everyone around us is English and where most people only speak English. In some countries, it's normal to flip-flop between languages, but if I take the flip-flopping approach, it simply won't work. How do I know? Well, because I've made this mistake myself. More on this in the section about mistake number 2. So, key takeaway. Pick your target language and stick to it. No flip-flopping, keep it simple. Because simple is best. Mistake number 2 is closely linked to mistake number 1. It's just as lethal and can totally undermine your efforts. How do I know? Because I made this mistake too, and it was what made me almost give up. For those of you new to my channel, let me give you a quick background. Broadly speaking, my husband and I practice the one parent, one language, OPOL approach, and have been doing so since our son was born in 2016. I speak to the kids in Mandarin Chinese and my husband in Russian. But up until the age of 3, our son always replied to us in English only, despite his ability to understand everything we said. So what were we doing wrong? Well, it turns out that we thought we were using one parent, one language, but actually we were unintentionally using English way more than we thought. In my other video, where I explain our journey helping our son go from monolingual to trilingual in 3 months, I go into more detail as to what happened, but basically, we realized that we weren't consistent in using the target languages. Okay, so while we weren't exactly flip-flopping between languages from one sentence to the next, like that German-speaking mama mentioned previously, we were using English a lot, like maybe, 30-40% of the time. Why is this a problem? Firstly, it numerically reduces the child's exposure to the target language. Secondly, it reduces the child's need to use the target language because the child knows that you will respond to them in the majority language. Thirdly, well, it's that confusion thing again. They are essentially getting mixed signals from you, which makes them unsure and confused. What's the easiest, safest thing to do from their point of view? Use the majority language. It's what feels comfortable. And there's another often overlooked danger. Every time you use the majority language with your child or allow your child to reply to you in the majority language, you are creating a slippery slope situation. It's so easy to fall into a pattern of just talking in the majority language, and before you know it, your child will only speak to you in the majority language, and that's when lots of parents simply give up. Now, let's move on to mistake number 3. Before I reveal this mistake, I have a confession to make. I've been teaching my kids how to read and write Chinese myself for several years. For the first year or so, before I had a major mindset shift, I got so frustrated if my child couldn't remember a word we'd looked at a gazillion times. One day, while reading with my son, I actually yelled at him and said, "Are you dumb or what?" I actually called my child dumb. This might have been literally the worst thing I've ever done as a mum, as a human being. What kind of mum would call their child dumb or even have that thought? The thing is, I would bet that many of you might occasionally think that your child is dumb when you are frustrated that they're not learning the thing you want them to learn. I told you this confession to illustrate one very important truth. The third major mistake parents make when raising multilingual kids is this. You think it's your child's fault that they won't speak to you in the target language. There is something wrong with them. When you say things like, "Oh, but my child won't reply to me in my language," or, "Oh, my child doesn't want to speak my language," or, "Oh, my child," stop. It's not your child, it's you. Now, before you throw your phone or laptop across the room and smash that thumb down button, please hear me out. Look, I know firsthand how frustrating raising your child to be bilingual can be. I've been there myself, trust me. For the longest time, I just felt so frustrated, thinking that my son just didn't want to speak our languages. But what we parents often forget is that the onus is on us to create the conditions for our child to speak the target language. As I point out in my book, link is in the description box below if you're interested, it's completely up to you. Bilingual success can be boiled down to one very simple formula: exposure and need. If both conditions are met, and provided your child doesn't have any learning difficulties, they should really become bilingual. Now, ask yourself this. Does your child have control over their environment? Do they dictate how much exposure they get to the target language? Do they influence if there's the need to speak the language? No. You are responsible for creating the right conditions. So you really need to shift your mindset from thinking that the problem lies with your child to taking total ownership of your role as a parent who wants to nurture your child's potential. And this is absolutely not about forcing your child to do something, as some people previously pointed out. Being bilingual is actually a totally normal state for us as a species, as human beings. According to statistics cited by the BBC, over half of the world's population is fluent in more than one language. It's in fact totally natural for us to be multilingual, given the right conditions. If I make my child train 10 hours a day so he can, juggle 50 balls at the same time, okay, maybe you can say that's forcing him to do something unnatural and something he doesn't want to do. Although actually my son might think juggling 50 balls is super cool, but back to my point, you are the adult here. You are, for the time being, largely in control of all the input in your child's world. That control gives you responsibility. Own it. If you're still watching after I revealed the previous super harsh truth, thank you. But be warned, there's one more harsh truth coming up. Let me tell you a quick story. Someone I know who's originally from Hungary speaks really good English. She never went to university or anything like that, so I asked her, wow, how did you learn to speak English? She told me that it was one thing and one thing only. Television. Apparently, back home in Hungary, she would just binge watch English cartoons and TV programs every day, and she just picked up English like that, according to her. And she's not alone. Have you heard of the boy band BTS? Assuming you haven't lived under a rock for the last 10 years, you might have heard of the Korean music sensation. One of the members, RM, famously learned to speak English by watching the classic comedy series Friends. Awesome! So I can just put my kid in front of the TV all day, put on some cartoons in the target language, or even better, just give them an iPhone and let them watch stuff in the target language on YouTube. And that's my job done, right? Despite the alleged success stories of the BTS member and my less famous friend from Hungary, any child education expert would tell you that children, especially very young children, learn language best through two-way interaction. Television is no substitute for two-way interaction in raising bilingual children because it lacks the dynamic and responsive nature of human interaction, which is crucial for language acquisition. Studies show that kids learn languages way better when they chat with real people compared to just watching TV. For instance, a cool study by Professor Patricia Kuhl found that young children who had live language sessions with an actual tutor picked up words faster than those who just listened to TV or audio recordings. It's the live feedback, context, and emotional connections that make all the difference. Back to my Hungarian friend, for example. She's lived and worked in the UK for more than 20 years. Maybe that plays a huge part in her fluency in English, and not just the TV she watched as a kid. I can also go into all the potential danger and harm of screen addiction, but that's a whole different topic for another video. In short, while TV and online videos can be a source of fun, engaging content in a target language, they should complement rather than replace actual real-life communication. The last mistake is the most fatal of them all. If you make this mistake, it's literally game over. Bye! When it comes to this mistake, I have to admit that it's not one I have personally made, although I did get pretty damn close to it. This mistake is called giving up. My husband and I very nearly gave up on this whole trilingual thing. It was just too hard, too frustrating. We thought it was meant to come naturally, that it would just happen easily if we just spoke to our kids in our languages. But one encounter I had with another parent changed our lives. Watch my Trilingual in 3 months video to find out what actually happened. And the progress we made after we implemented that parent's advice changed our life and saved us from this fatal mistake. Because it's so easy to give up. It's so easy to just go with the flow and speak English to our kids. Why bother? People tell us that the kids will lose it if they don't use it, that it won't stick once they are in school, that speaking a second language will be useless in 10 years' time, because we'll all have AI robots translating for us in real time. And so many people do give up, and that's okay. It's really hard, I absolutely get it. And if you've tried it and it didn't work out and you made a conscious decision to give up, You really shouldn't feel guilty about it. I would never want to make anyone feel bad or feel like a failure. But I also truly believe that if raising your child to be multilingual truly matters to you, then you shouldn't give up. You won't want to give up because the journey itself is so worth it in and of itself. It's such a cliche, and I'm sorry if I've made you want to reach for the sick bucket, but honestly, raising your child to speak more than one language will be one of the most fulfilling experiences of your life as a parent. It certainly has been for us, despite the ups and downs and some people here on YouTube criticizing our approach. It's okay. You absolutely can disagree with me. You do you, I do me. Do people actually say I do me? Anyway, despite all that, I'm so glad we didn't give up. And I hope that you who are watching this right now will always find the resilience in yourself to just keep going. As I promised at the beginning of the video, you can download my family language planner for free by visiting the link in the description box below. You can also check out my book on Amazon. And if you want to know how we raise our kids to be trilingual in practice, check out the next video where I go into more detail on our tactics and routine.